Pleasure this morning to introduce Rain Walker. Rain is the CEO of the Aura program, and without further ado, Rain, it's all yours.
Hello everyone! So this is general stuff about me, but I'm going to give you a general overview of what we're talking about. Today I'm going to introduce you to something called personality languages, which many of you have probably already used, but I'm going to give you some examples of them. Okay. So I just want you to raise your hand if you've used any of these things that are about to pop up on the screen to describe either yourself or others. I try to keep the more common ones towards the end so you're not holding your hand up as long, but
I just did the Hardware's house thing. Only because my 10-year-old made me.
So as we can see, they're pretty common. We generally create like a schema of things that we are like, okay, well, this person is very similar to this person. Like maybe a Virgo is very similar to type A, which is similar to like a certain Myers-Briggs type. Like we make these connections in our mind and then we use them. So what's the problem? Like if we're all using these things, where is the difference? Well, it's mostly in how we define these things. So if you go to someone and say, hey, what's a Virgo like? Or hey, what's a Libra like? You're going to get different answers from different people. Like even professional astrologers, don't get me started, whenever it comes to those sort of people, they have like different definitions of these things. So whenever we talk about how we use them, we typically create profiles of people. So we have myself and then two fake people that don't really exist. All of these 7 things, even though they're not necessarily in the same categories, these would be like 7 things that someone would describe themselves as if you were to be like, hey, here's 7 blanks, fill it up with who you are. They would come up with stuff like this, and you don't really have any personality tests or assessments that actually cover the gamut of all of these individual differences. But they do tend to cover certain things. So most personality assessments reduce things down into smaller categories. So whenever you have reduction in diversity, it's normally having to do with making a very large number of variables a very small number of variables. And then you can put those people into categories, as opposed to, I don't know, describing them in all of those different ways that you were measuring in the first place. There's also reduced availability due to cost, or sometimes you have to go to a psychologist in order to get some of these assessments done to you. You also have this alignment problem where you have things set as exclusive, meaning if you're more of one, you're less of another, like with introverts and extroverts, or with oppositional alignment where you have stuff like Democratic and Republican where people are like, we are opposite, we have nothing in common. And then you also have the problem of some of these tests being economically driven. So whenever you have a lot of money funneling into these assessments, you find out that certain people are describing what they want measured. And sometimes it's not as helpful to everyone else whenever these people aren't really in touch with the people that they're measuring. Here's where the OR program comes in. So the OR program is comprehensive, meaning, as I said in the very first slide, I want to create a universal personality language that is quantitative in nature. It's also very specific. It has to do with situations, not necessarily broad general ideas about personality. It's guided, meaning that it uses journals and processing sheets. It's non-linear in terms of the exclusive alignment that I was talking about earlier and the oppositional alignment. It doesn't have that. It's also communication-oriented and collaboratively oriented, as well as scientifically driven. So it's asking people, what's important to you about you? How can we measure that? And then the scientific elements of it have to do with my background in psychology. It also is heightened, more available than other assessments because it's a virtual assessment and it's provided online. But now for the big finale. What is personality if you're saying that it's this big, comprehensive thing? Here's a list of the functions. Keep in mind each of these squares represent almost 100 tests. So these are the variables and the differences and all these things that we have. You'll see 4 colors. These are the 4 cells of the OR program. You also have this website. If you're very curious and you're like, I want to know more what you mean by physiology or more about expectations, the website's there for you. As far as how you can help, which is the big question for Million Cups. One says the $1 million question, others say it's the Million Cups question. If you want to be a member, we'll be opening user registration very soon. Right now, we're looking for focus group volunteers, so if any of these areas are especially interesting to you, you can come up to me and say, hey, I want to be involved in the culture focus group or the interactivity focus group, and then I'll let you know whenever that's planned. I'm looking for advisors, so if you have any specialties in any of these areas where you feel like you might be able to help develop this language a little bit better, you can tell me, and then I would happily onboard you. And then also, if you have any connections to funding, I am so here for funding. More money, less problems. That's my mentality. So with that being said, that is the majority of the ORA program, but like I said, go to this website and you will have all of your answers and more answered. Questions answered. Thank you. Now this was sort of designed to create more questions than answers, so I'm assuming that there's going to be some hands that come up, so if y'all have any questions, let me know. Yes?
How do you make money with it?
It's a subscription service.
Okay.
So instead of, most psychological assessments are you pay like $100 for like 7 hours of assessment, depending on the assessment. Whereas with this, it's more take it as you need it, and it's on a regular, like a scheduled payment, mostly monthly.
Who do you see being most attracted to this solution? I mean, if you don't, if this isn't something that you're looking at, what are the problems that this can help solve?
So as far as like our niche customer, you mean? So most of it is people that want to see more as opposed to less. So there are some people in the world that are like, I just want a simple answer. So like the Myers-Briggs will solve for them. They're like, I want to be put into 16 types, and that's the end of it. Whereas some people are like, I want to know more than just like 16 things that I might be. I want you to describe my intelligence. I want you to describe how much I know about certain things. Like they want to see that breadth and depth as opposed to just having typographic categories assigned to them. So those are the priority of people, but as far as who can be helped by it, is people that aren't achieving what they want to know in their personal development on their own. So they would rather have someone there to be like, hey, what are these different labels that I'm hearing about that I want to apply to myself or not apply to myself? What are these things that people are talking about that I don't actually know about? The ORA program will solve all of those problems.
So, like eHarmony kind of matches folks.
Mhm.
So do you see that in this?
Bonding. So eventually there will be a compatibility assessment involved in bonding where it'll talk about how much cohesion can happen in a relationship between two or more people.
So you've spoken to this for the individual,
Yes.
and I know that many corporations have got unique personality tests and assessments and such. Do you foresee the ARC program having a side with businesses and corporations?
Yes. So the idea with personality is that,
Microsoft doesn't like what you're doing.
there we go. So some of the things that might help a corporation are things like interactivity with like group assignment. So if you see, okay, well, or even like skills and intelligence, you would want to group people that complement each other as opposed to like do the same thing sometimes. Then sometimes you want multiple people that do the same thing very well. But the idea is whenever the ORA program grows a little bit more, I'll be able to license it to those people, and then they'll send in a certain like overarching charge, and then they'll be able to provide it to the people under them in whatever context it is, whether it's like a school or a company, and be able to give it to those people at reduced cost or no cost.
Can you go a little bit more in depth about how the user will do assessments or whatever to give you this data?
Okay, so most personality assessments that are available online normally use Likert scales. You probably recognize as like 1 to 7. How much of this are you? Strongly agree, strongly disagree. Sometimes you have like -3 to 3. With this, you're prompted to think about certain situations in your life through journals. So you're like, okay, gather this evidence from your life experience where it has to do with this very specific characteristic of a person. And then go into the processing where it's talking about that one specific thing that I was trying to find in those situations, and then say how much of there that was, and then how well it matches to the definition of Aura's perfect example of this characteristic. And then you get the results calculated automatically as opposed to being sent in, because one of the strongest increases in price is because of labor. So whenever you have automation, it makes the price drastically reduced.
So do you see, is there input that could be automated just from user activity? So in other words, well, I'm kind of thinking of China. So China's on this huge thing of controlling their population, right? So if you have the algorithms to be able to capture the information from a decent use case, it might increase their sociability scores or whatever. Do you see that as a, not necessarily a China thing, but just, is there a way to capture data automatically that could be inputted in?
That kind of scares me a little bit, just because, what was it, Cambridge Analytica, where people got a bunch of their user data like scavenged over the internet, and I think it was Facebook, and then that was used for research, and then everyone went up in arms and they were like, burn it down! So I'm scared to invite that into my life, but as far as creating something where the behavior automatically results in assessment, maybe. But it would be within the context of the Aura program, as opposed to like seeking out their Facebook and their Twitter and their Instagram and then gathering data from that, because inevitably you would be taking in information from other people that aren't in the Aura program. So I wouldn't want to do that.
What is your goal, like, considering that that would be information that would indirectly populate someone's personality score? To what degree do people have responsibility to provide all of that? And are you getting an honest assessment if they're providing it versus, indirect, getting a more accurate portrayal? Then what is the hope for the individual through using this program?
So as far as the assessments that people are taking, they have perfect choice over themselves. Like, they don't have to do anything. Like, it's not like you're set at A0 and you have to work all the way to AP4. If you were to choose to do R2 and then U5 and then A6, it wouldn't matter. Because the primary reason is for self-discovery and self-exploration. So if you choose, like, I don't really want to talk about my experiences because there are certain things that I don't like thinking about that have happened to me. By all means, don't take the experiences, or the trait within experiences, don't take that specific one. Like, you have the option to choose where you look. You don't have to follow a prescribed course. But one of the hopeful things is that if someone were to do every single one of these, that profile would be so in-depth. And then possibly, if you were to take this and then, God forbid, like, you pass away, and then suddenly you have this wealth of information about yourself that your children, your grandchildren, your family can look at and learn about posthumously. So they won't forget about this person that came before them. They can learn more about their family. They can learn more about their family's history. There's just a lot of applications that can come from a personality profile of this depth and complexity.
Since the focus is self-awareness, self-discovery, and it's right now more of an individual line, could you see the psychology world, some counselors taking advantage of it, and then working with people to suggest that they go through this program?
Yes. So the foundational, whenever I said that this was communication oriented, it's helpful to therapists because they would be able to take in a lot of this phenomenological data, that's what they call it, where it's more from your subjective experience, describe it. Like, have your own subjective experience describing something can tell you more about what's happening there than if you were to have someone else describe it, like if you have their parent come in and talk about it. So if you have something like this, where it's not only put in terms of a psychologist, and they're more able to like absorb that information about your client, you would have a lot of things happen quicker and more effectively. So that's more about the communication orientation of it. Yes. But it is geared towards therapists because it uses psychology.
Are you approaching different therapists, psychologists with this?
Some of the advisors that I have right now are currently working therapists. Specifically with this more R section, because these things have a lot more applications in health.
got this broken into 4 colors and
Yes.
letters and all that. Does this stuff kind of line up with DISC or a lot of the things with 4 different flavors of people's behavior?
I think that 4 is just a favorite of personality. Like, whenever you have Myers-Briggs, there's 4 options of 2. You have the DISC assessment, you have focus assessments, like all of these things have like 4 categories often. I don't know why that is, but for mine, I found 4 dimensions of human experience. One is artistic, which is green, one is social, which is blue, one is living, which is purple, and one is talented, the talent itself is, which is red. But that took a long time. Keep in mind, oh, I forgot to mention this. I've been working on this for like 4 or 5 years. So like that's why it's so expansive, because I've just been like, what is this individual difference? What is this individual difference?
So it's also geared towards help, because I have 2 introverts.
Mm.
So is that, like after they take this assessment, is it going to, how is it going to help them better communicate? You know? How does that help?
So specifically relating to their introversion. So interactivity is the OR program's take on introversion and extroversion. So whenever you have there's a lot of personality assessments that use extroversion as like the default, where it's talking about like, you're either extroverted or you're not, and then sometimes they call it introverted. With interactivity, it's broken down into such smaller bites. So like, I would consider myself an introvert, but I actually kind of like public speaking. It's more like whenever I'm walking around a room and having to talk to a bunch of strangers, that's where I'm like, but like if I'm standing in front of people, I can talk very easily. This assessment will tell you these things that you're good at, that because introverts and extroverts typically get lumped into behaving similarly, they don't think that they would be good at that. So this assessment would say like, hey, maybe you're good at public speaking, maybe you're good at networking, maybe you're good at this, maybe you're good at that. So it would give more examples of their strengths as opposed to focusing on their weaknesses, or an absence of extroversion.
Are there any more questions for Rain? Thank you very much for